All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mike in New Haven podcast. Episode, I think, 54? 54. Well, 53, actually. I don't know what episode it is, but anyway, we're back. And it's good to be with you here. First episode for this month of February. It was a busy month in January. If you haven't yet, check out my previous episode. It was a two-part special, parts 1 and 2. With my buddy Marvin McIntyre, as we broke down Super Bowl 55, what we thought about the game, and of course, congratulations to the Buccaneers. Tom Brady wins again, his 7th Super Bowl championship, as the Bucs trounce the Chiefs 31-9. So this episode's cool for me because we've been having a lot of law enforcement people on lately. You remember Bill Cannon? I just had Mark DeMeo on. I have more people I'm working on that are coming on in the coming weeks and months, hopefully. And my next guest is interesting because if you happen to be living in Harlem, in Spanish Harlem, particularly during the 1980s, you know her as Flashdance. If you're a fan of the Police Off the Cuff podcast, you know her as Miss Homicide. Who is she if you don't know who she is? Well, my next guest is a retired first-grade detective who served 25 years from 1982 to 2007 as a member of the New York City Police Department. Originally joining the force at the age of 20 in 1982, she would go on to work in the Special Victims Division and later the Homicide Division. Since her retirement, she's worked extensively as a private investigator, one of her duties being helping to find the parents of children in foster care, as well as finding missing children as well. So without further ado, Miss Flashdance, Miss Homicide, Detective Irma Rivera joins me now on the Mike in New Haven podcast. Irma, welcome. How are you?
Hi, how are you, Mike?
I'm good. It's good. It's good to have you here. I'm looking forward to this. So finally excited that we can do this interview. So we'll start with your background. You're a lifelong New Yorker. You were raised in the Alphabet City section of Manhattan as a child of New York City housing. So take me through what your early years were like.
Okay, I was raised with 3 brothers. I had a very strict family. My mother, was from Puerto Rico, so was my father. I also had 3 half siblings, my brother Butch and my sister Eleanor Maria. They also grew up with me. I grew up in a very strict family. My mother was very old-fashioned, illiterate. She was kind of like a little bit afraid of my father, but but she grew us up, going to church on Sundays. Really, we were very poor. We didn't have much money. We were on welfare. My father used to drink, and hang around with a lot of women, so that's the way I kind of grew up. I grew up in that type of environment, and my mother was a little bit afraid of my father because he was very strict and, typical, machismo.
Yeah.
So
Sangre caliente, as they call it. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's true. So, you kind of talked about it when you were on the Police Off the Cuff podcast with Bill and Mark. You wanted to be a police officer pretty early on because you said you had this great line where you're saying, you just wanted to be outside and you saw this female cop who was outside. And you said, I can't wait to become a cop because then I'll always be on the streets and nobody can take me off of it. So, it's interesting because when we're young, we have this sort of an idea of what we want to do, right? But as we get older, it can kind of evolve. Once we get to our teenage years, we find a different interest or, maybe we still want to do it, but we have second thoughts. So nonetheless, when one enters that stage of life, it can change. So as you got older and more aware of the world, if you will, especially living in a city like New York, how did your viewpoint on the police change once you got to your teens?
It didn't change at all. I still had a lot of respect for the police, as a kid, when I was in junior high school, the cops from the 9th precinct would stop at our junior high school. One of them was Donnie Boyle, who later on in life, I wound up working with him about 2 years ago at the Museum of Natural History. I actually posted a picture of him on my Facebook page. So I had him. I had other cops, that I used to see around. They were very friendly and were very nice. So I was kind of admired the police. I also had a walkie-talkies when I was a kid. I had a radio that scanned the police, the police stations, the zones. So that radio was pretty good because I was able to hear what was going on in my neighborhood. So I would do that. And even as a teenager, I was so interested in the police department that I would actually go down to the criminal court building and sit down at the arraignments and write down what the people were being charged for and then find out what those crimes were. So I always had a real interest in the police and it just never really changed.
It's the same thing for me. I grew up around that. My mom knew a lot of, or still knows to this day, and is friends with a lot of the firemen and police officers down here in New Haven. So those are one of my fondest memories, particularly when I was little, we would go to the fire station, one of the fire stations here in New Haven. They put me up on the truck. So it creates a great bond early on because you see them as what they are, which is human beings. And so it's a nice connection to make and an important one to make. So as I mentioned, you came on the job in 1982. And those stories that you've told about your early years, man, they're both hilarious and they're also frightening because, police work is dangerous stuff, man, especially in a city like New York. So when you came on the job, you were my age. I'm 20. I'll be 21 in a few weeks. And you were originally working in Spanish Harlem. And you said you were glad to be a cop in the 80s because a lot needed to be done. So when you first got on the job, who would you say were the senior officers in the precinct who were most helpful to you?
I think one of the most senior persons that helped me was a cop named Eddie Velasquez. He was really good at his job and he was very thorough. And I worked with him a couple of times in the patrol car. There was one funny story that I told before that he, all of a sudden we're driving around, he just jumps out of the car and I don't even know what the hell's going on, Mm-hmm. So he taught me a lot. Terry Whalen, who was my partner, who was really freaking funny as hell, may he rest in peace. He passed away a couple of years ago. Ronnie Alvarez was another one of my partners. But back then there was a lot of old timers in the precinct. Like one guy in my precinct, they called him the Duke. He was funny, but at the same time, he taught me a lot. And then it turns out that my brother-in-law, Bob McIntyre, who was a lieutenant in my precinct at the time, turned out to, who's now my brother-in-law married to my sister-in-law now, he taught me a lot. And he taught me a lot, especially when I had gotten hurt. I fell out of a police car back in the 80s and I got hurt really bad. And I was inside for like a couple of weeks. And at that time, Bob McIntyre taught me how to use the computers. He taught me how to use Finest, how to run the plate checks. And that was really, really important for my career because from that, I learned so much and I was able to, use that as I went on to, to become a better cop. Because, using the computers and learning how to run plates and run people's names, was very helpful to me. So I got to give a lot of credit to Bob McIntyre for that.
And I imagine that once technology became even more prevalent in the 90s, in the early 2000s, that early training helped you once the NYPD started to shift towards a more technology-oriented approach to policing. So that's important, man, because in any job, you need those people that are going to show you the ropes. So,
yeah. For sure. And one thing is a lot of people didn't know how to use computers, and so I always made it an effort for me to learn because after I learned early on, I wanted to make sure that I knew throughout my career how to use everything that came up, any kind of computer programs that came up, that would help, help me with fighting crime. I learned how to use.
And look at now. There's college courses on it. There's career fields in it. So it's definitely evolved. And, you were ahead of your time in learning it for sure. So early on, you worked in the SNU unit, which for my listeners that don't know what that is the Street Narcotics Enforcement Unit that the NYPD had back then. So drug stings are, again, I talked about police work being dangerous. That's probably one of the most dangerous aspects of police work because that can go bad in a hurry. And the two cases that come to my mind, and I'm sure you remember, are that of Detective Luis Lopez, who was gunned down during a marijuana buy and bust in '93, and then Sean Carrington, another detective gunned down in the Bronx under similar circumstances in January of 1998. So you talked about your initial experiences in that unit. So tell me, in order to be an effective narc, in order to be an effective undercover street cop in that sense, kind of trying to get drugs off the street and the dangerous people that are dealing them, what does it take?
First of all, when I did Street Narcotics Enforcement Unit, I didn't do it like with the old CCB. I was at the precinct level of Street Narcotics Enforcement Unit. I did go into old CCB for a short time, but for me particularly, it was very nerve-wracking. You had to know the street lingo. I was kind of a little bit naive. I was new in the police department. I was only there like maybe 6 months, and they put me into old CCB because I looked really young. And that was really hard for me because first of all, you had to know a lot about the streets and about drugs. I didn't know a lot about drugs. Like I told the story once before how, when they asked me to go buy cocaine and I tried to buy heroin, I tried to switch it. The guy asked me,
I'll take that.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happened. The guy says, I have black tape. I go, oh, I'll take that. And they knew that at that point I burned myself. And also everyone knew who I was. There wasn't too many, Latina, Hispanic, female cops at that time. So they knew that I was a cop right away. After a while they knew. So every time I tried to buy drugs, everyone knew who I was. And it was a little bit nerve-wracking too, because back in the 80s, they put me into certain situations, like they put me into a social club one time by myself, and there's all these men in there. I actually was really scared, so I really wasn't too fond of going the narcotics approach. You have to be pretty good at that. And I felt that I wasn't that good as an undercover in narcotics.
Were you in the SNU unit? I was just saying, were you in it prior to Irma Lozada getting killed or after?
It was after. I believe it was after. The SNU unit that I did in the precinct was more of an observation sales. So we would go into a building, we would have binoculars, we would watch who was selling drugs, who was buying drugs, and then we would tell the people on the street, the cops on the street, who bought, what kind of. Okay. I mean, that was fun too. I mean, when I did that, I mean, we chased so many people. We chased so many people. A lot of people ran on us. We chased a lot of people. You know, we did a lot of, we got search warrants based on the information that we got from doing the street narcotics, you know, the precinct level where OCCB got involved, and they, you know, did warrants and made arrests, you know, so it was pretty interesting work, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, but it's interesting the way you described it, because you would think that after what happened to Irma, and for my listeners, that was another Irma, I can't talk now. For my listeners who don't know who that is, she was a female cop with the New York City Transit Police, and she was chasing down somebody who I think snatched a chain in September of 1984, and the dirtbag killed her, took her gun and shot her. And
that was a hard time for me because her name was Irma. You know, and Irma Lozada happened to be my grandmother's last name, so people right away thought it was me. I mean, we look completely different, but people thought it was me, and just heard Irma. And as a matter of fact, when I was younger, I worked in a supermarket on Columbus Avenue in Columbus Avenue. Let's go. When I was younger, I worked in a supermarket on Bleecker Street. When I went to the 20 and I went to sex crimes, I remember going into a supermarket on Columbus Avenue and 82nd Street, and there was a guy that worked there. His name was Juan, and Juan worked with me as a kid on Bleecker Street. And when he saw me, he goes, "Oh my God, Irma, I thought you died. I went to your funeral." He thought that Irma Lozada was actually me. You know, there's another female cop in Texas named Irma who got killed also, which is not a very uncommon name, Irma. You know, so you know, but when she died, it was really hard. Like, I mean, that was like one of the first female cops that I heard that had gotten shot and killed, at least in the NYPD. So it kind of hit really close to home then.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of cops in the department's history, at least in recent times, that are female that have gotten killed. I mean, the two that I can think of, not counting those who died from 9/11 related illnesses, is Maura Smith, who died on 9/11.
I know Maura Smith. And there was two other female cops shot recently. There was one.
Familia. Yeah, she got killed. That's the only two I can think of, Maura and Familia. So it's really an uncommon thing for female cops to get killed. And that's the reason I brought up Lozada, was because I was wondering, I was like, you would think that would change the way that departments would deal with how to handle female cops, especially in situations like that, you know. But
then that's being, see, when if you word it like that, then that's being like stereotypical, you know, like female, male. It doesn't matter what we are when we wear a uniform. You know, we're one. There's no sex involved. You know, some people might think there is, but when I was a cop, I didn't think of myself as a female. You know, I was a cop. You know,
yeah, that's true. That's true. That's a fair point. So, like, you kind of talked about it being in a social club by yourself, but in the early years in SNU, is there a particular incident that comes to mind where you said to yourself, you know, I'm glad that did not go terribly?
Well, maybe not in SNU, but maybe on patrol. Okay. I had more incidences that occurred. Like one incident that I really recall that to this day, sometimes it scares me when I think about it, was we got a call into a building, into a rooftop. And I remember being up on the rooftop, and I took a step and I was about to take another step, and my partner, Terry, pulled me back, and there was a big hole on the roof. On the roof, there was a big hole that went all the way down into the building. So if I had stepped one more step, I probably would have fallen through that whole building. That's one. Another incident that I had was like on 105th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. There was an abandoned school building there. And we were going in there just, you know, just to canvas, make sure that, you know, we used to like get out of the patrol car and you know, I guess look for stuff, you know, so look for trouble. So anyway, so we went into this building, and I remember opening the door, and when I opened the door and I kicked it open, there was a man behind that door, and we both stared at each other for a second, and I felt that he was going to kill me. I mean, it's just a feeling that I got. So we took out our guns, you know, we put him against the wall. He actually had a gun in his pocket.
Wow.
And he turned out to be one of the guys that came from the Cuban flotilla, you know, the guys that came off the boat, that Castro sent over. Mm-hmm. There was a name for them, Marines. I forgot the name of it. They had a name. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that guy, when we arrested him, he never told me his name. Never gave us any information about himself. Nothing. but he did tell me that he could have killed me if he wanted to. So that I remember, and he had a gun, and I remember that. And that was one time that I really got scared, that I thought that I could have died. That's the second incident, the hole in the floor, that guy with the gun, and just car accidents. I've had really bad car accidents as a cop, where we got into bad car accidents, and those times, I did get scared. I had one bad car accident where I almost got paralyzed. I actually have a cervical fusion from that, but I stayed on the job even with those injuries, because
were you responding to calls, lights, and sirens? That's when it happened, or
no? We were coming out of a tunnel with on 133 and Broadway, and a drunk driver sideswiped us. So
how many cops have died that way?
I already had an injury on my neck from falling out of the car in 1983, so I already had an injury, so it just kind of made it worse. But if I still stayed on, and when I retired, I had surgery on my neck.
At least, I wouldn't have stayed on after that. I would have been like, oh, okay, I had my fun.
It's funny because the police surgeon, Martinez, actually, he was Hispanic. He wanted to survey me off the police department in the 90s. And I actually begged him. I said, please let me stay. I have nothing else. What am I going to do with myself? I'm so young. He said, okay, you can stay on, but you got to be really careful. You have a really bad neck injury. And I stayed on, and I had a great career. Thanks. Thank God.
That's why I want to have you on. That's why you are on. We're talking with retired NYPD Detective Irma Rivera here on the Mike the New Haven podcast, aka Miss Homicide. And if you're a fan of Police Off the Cuff, you know who she is, and it's nice to have her on. So you talk a lot about being involved in the community early on during your years as a patrol cop, and being a cop isn't an easy job as it is, as we kind of just talked about with the things that you've gone through. But when you're a cop of color, it's 10 times harder. When you're Puerto Rican, so it's hard for you. And I imagine Black cops feel the same way, because there's this notion that if you're a Black or Hispanic cop, makes you a sellout. So did you struggle with that in your early years? Did people call you out for that?
No, I never had that. Maybe because I never really thought much of race, because I grew up in Alphabet City. I grew up in like the East Village. My friends were every mixture. My sisters are half Irish and half Puerto Rican, so I never really cared much about race. When I came to the 2-3, I didn't have any problems with people because of being Hispanic. If anything, it was to my advantage, especially working in Spanish Harlem, to the point that, people respected me. Everybody knew who I was. Everybody was like, hey, Rivera, I was Spanish. People were happy to see a Latina, being on patrol. So I didn't really have that much of an issue with it. Of course, within the cops made fun about, some cops made fun about the fact that I was Hispanic. Like one guy in particular, Lee Pachter, he used to work with me. He used to make fun of the fact that I was Hispanic, but he married a Hispanic, so, so it was like a lot of joking that went on, a lot of racial jokes, but I don't have problem with racial jokes. I never did. Even to this day, I still make racial jokes with my friends, and people get mad at me because it's such a different world now, but back then it
was fine. Like my friends call me an Oreo. My friends call me an Oreo because, I talk like, I sound like a white guy. If you didn't know what I looked like, that's the thing. So but I've never minded because they say it with affection.
See, but it's funny, when I was younger, I think I spoke better as a young kid, and I used to hear that, oh, you sound like a whitey. Like, what the hell is that? Like, what does that mean? That you sound like you're educated? And I got more slangy speaking as I became a cop, because you're on the streets, you just
right, you pick it up, you absorb it.
I did pick up a lot of bad habits in the police department. I did, because when I was younger, I actually was criticized by Hispanics and Blacks for the way I spoke. Like, you're very articulate. You speak really well.
Thank you.
But people think that because you're a Hispanic or a minority that you have to speak like ghetto. And that's just a freaking ignorant thing to say when people say that to me. I just find that so ignorant.
Yeah.
The fact that my husband is Caucasian, like, oh, you married a white guy. What the hell? I mean, all my friends are mixed race. All my whole family's mixed.
He clicked with you. That's what it is. I mean, you found the right person for you.
You're a cop. Who's going to marry you? Another cop. It's hard to marry anybody out of the police department, especially for females. There's been incidences where women who are cops, have boyfriends who take their guns, who aren't cops.
Yeah.
Who take their guns and commit a crime with their guns. So you got to be really careful as a female cop to who you're involved with. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to be involved with another officer. How
did you meet your husband? I know you met him on the job, but when did you meet him, I guess?
I actually met him out, but he didn't work with me. He worked in another precinct, but many years ago,
All right. you know. Yeah, no. So that being said, because when did you first get? Because this, I want to know this, so it segues perfectly into my next question. When did you get your gold shield?
I was a white shield for a long time. I got my gold shield when I went to the sex crimes unit, but I worked as a white shield through the robbery unit.
Mm-hmm.
I went to sex crimes, and I went there as a white shield. But in sex crimes, I wound up getting the gold shield, and I got second grade in sex crimes.
Okay, and the gold shield was given to you like what, 1988, 89, 90, around there?
Like 90 maybe.
Okay, so you're still an officer when the Lisa Steinberg case comes around. You know,
I was a white shield then, right? Because I remember Joe Steinberg making reference to me being a white shield at that time.
Yep, and when you had him in the interrogation room. So for my listeners that don't know what this case was, do you mind explaining this?
Yeah, the Steinberg case was a case involving a lawyer that lived in Manhattan, like on 10th Street, who got an illegal adoption of 2 children. And his wife was Hedda Nussbaum. She was a writer at the time when he met her. And she was an abused woman, and the kids were also abused. Lisa Steinberg died from head injuries, that she sustained from Joe Steinberg, who was her illegally adopted father, who was a lawyer, a cokehead, a piece of crap, because he wound up hurting her to the point that she had a brain hemorrhage and she wound up dying. That was a really big case in New York at the time. And the reason why was back then, when I was a cop in the early 80s, like any domestic incident involving a family, like nothing happened. Like, the guy would just get thrown out of the house, but he'd be able to come back. There was really no rules about men beating up women. There was really no way of reporting child abuse cases, and Lisa Steinberg's case kind of like opened the door to ACS having what they call a prompt response. ACS is child welfare, Administrative for Children's Services. It was the child welfare unit back then. So it opened up a lot of doors on reporting child abuse cases. There was mandatory reporters then set up, like schools are mandatory reporters, doctors are mandatory reporters, and also then things changed with women with domestic violence. I remember like being a cop and how a husband could beat up his wife and like we wouldn't arrest them. There was like no real reason to arrest him. The wife said she didn't want to press charges. Nothing happened, You just drew the guy out of the house and that was it. So, the Lisa Steinberg case kind of really was a big eye opener for society about, what was going on and in homes that people didn't even know about. And also kids coming to school with like chunks of hair missing, bruises, and nobody reporting anything. So that case kind of made the laws change where people had to report certain cases to ACS. And schools, especially mandatory reporters, except still, I still personally feel that Catholic schools do not report anything. My kids went to Catholic school, and there was a couple of kids that I saw in that school that you knew there was stuff going on with them, and the Catholic schools just didn't report anything. And I'm pretty sure they still don't.
That's unfortunate. Because I was going to say, I think now with domestic situations, and you know better than I would because you have the law enforcement experience, I do not. I think it's mandatory now, at least down here in New Haven, you have to bring at least one of the spouses in. If there's credible evidence to believe an assault took place, you have to, it's mandatory to arrest somebody.
I think that's all across the board now.
Okay.
I think it's everywhere. I think that's part of law enforcement now. But a lot of times the cops do make the arrests. But that's our job. But if the courts let them out, anything happens, they blame the police. But it's not the police; it's the court.
Yeah.
Judges and the prosecutor.
Yeah. And domestic situations, a lot of cops have told me that that's probably the most. That's the radio call they really don't want because that's a volatile situation. They're talking about not letting them respond to that now, and I'm like, that's.
I cannot see any social worker or anybody else respond to an incident of a domestic violence except for a police officer.
Somebody said to send both.
Yeah.
Which maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, how are you going to send both? I think it's just ridiculous the way they're trying to change everything, I just don't understand like what's happening with our society, how they're making everything like everybody has to be treated so sensitively, so sensitive now. And it just doesn't really make a lot of sense, it's not going to work. I'm telling you, it's just right now, things are so much worse. Outside, just like going crazy. They like committing robberies, knowing they're not going to get arrested. You know, people carrying guns. Black on black crime is through the roof. You know, I mean, the people who are really suffering, the people who live in these neighborhoods. You know, the people who are making the laws. Look what happened in the White House. They stormed the White House, and these people going crazy. They're going crazy. Oh my God, they stormed the White House. What happens to the people who live in these communities that's happening to them every single day? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and there was, I mean, did you see that video of the robbery that just happened? I think it was in Manhattan. Like these guys just stormed this really fancy store. I can't remember what the name of the store was, but they just ransacked the place. I think the PBA posted that video on Twitter. I was like, wow, you know, it's scary stuff.
It's scary stuff. All over. I mean, kids, I watched a video that happened downtown, you know, in my neighborhood downtown, where there was a guy at Dunkin' Donuts just buying something, and these kids came in and beat him up, took his money. And in Chicago, they carjacking cars left and right. You know, I mean, I saw carjacking with this poor old man. They just took his car, like, and there's nothing you can do. You just have to let them have it.
You know the nickname, my era, my generation. You know the nickname we have for Chicago, Chirac.
So funny.
Chirac. You know, we do not. Yeah, you couldn't pay me to go to Chicago. And I'm sure it's a nice city. I mean, I'm a big Knicks fan. If the Knicks are ever in town to play the Bulls, I'd love to go see it one day. But yeah, I'm gonna have to stay away from that. I mean, even down here in New Haven, the nickname for us is Gun Waving New Haven. You know, people are carrying a lot of firearms around here, and it's dangerous. I mean, we just had a Yale student get shot dead. Yeah, he got killed, and it's unfortunate.
You know, when I see those reports, I think about my kids. Any mother knows if you raise your kid in a decent way. I mean, the kid's going to school, he's going to college, like, and he was a target. They said he was targeted. That's what I heard on. You know, like just a thought of just that happening. Like I don't know how I would react. God forbid anything happened to my kids. That's the only person. Those are the only people that I really worry the most about is my kids.
Right.
I don't have to worry about too many other people.
And now that I'm older, I understand it, because, you know, me and my mom will have these conversations. It's so interesting now, as a kid, especially as a son, when you get older and you can have those adult conversations with your parents about this kind of stuff, because then you get a glimpse as to why they do the things they do, you know, because I didn't always understand it when I was smaller. Ma, why? What do you mean I can't go? But as I get older now, it clicks. Oh, that's why. And I appreciate it, because, you know, she meant well. Even though I thought she was strict at the time, it saved me, you know, and it creates respect.
I'm gonna tell you a story that happened when I was in Homicide. This was the saddest story that I remember. There was a mother, and it was her birthday, and her daughter wanted to go to a concert with her friend. And the mother tells me that the daughter was kneeling on her bed going, "Mommy, please let me go, please, please." And the mother had told her no in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And she said, "Mommy, please, please let me go." So her mother finally let her go. So she goes to this party, and she was hanging out with a girl who apparently, you know, was doing drugs. So these two girls, they were 16 years old. They go into a housing project down in Alphabet City, and they went to get cocaine. But apparently what happened was they did some coke, but then they did some heroin. The bags were mixed, and both girls died. Jesus. You know? They both died. They were 16 years old. I remember going to the morgue and seeing these two young girls on the slab in the morgue, and then talking to her mother and thinking about it, like, her mother was telling her she couldn't go, the guilt her mother felt about letting her daughter go to this party. And now the daughter died. Her mother didn't know she was doing drugs, and she dies on her mother's birthday. It was like the worst case you can imagine, you know, and it was just so sad. Like, and here it goes again, like, you know, you tell your kid not to do something, the kid does it anyway. I mean, I was a kid too. Like, you know, I didn't listen to my mother, you know. In a way, I'm glad I didn't listen to my mother, because I probably would be like a housewife, like just staying home all the time right now.
No, but that's true. That's why, man, shout out to all the moms out there. You know, my mom listens to this show, so I know she'll appreciate that part. She'll be like, "You see, de ver por qué?" You know, I know, mom.
My daughter's here right now, and she's looking at me. I can feel her staring at me. But my daughter, I've crashed her parties. You know, I've crashed things. If she goes out at night, I don't care if she goes out. I'll pick her up. I'll drive all her friends home, because, like, again, we know what happens. You know,
no, for sure.
It takes one little wrong decision, and everything could be gone.
And you moms have like the sixth sense. I don't know how. Like, you moms, dads, they're great too. They don't have it. Like, you guys, you literally, I feel like you guys have eyes in the back of your heads. It's amazing. There's like
I have a sixth sense to begin with. I feel like, you know, I think it's called claircognizance. I believe that's the right word.
Mm-hmm.
I have this thing that like this, when I get this feeling, it's always real. But now with my kids, it's even worse, you know. But I'm always very careful with them, and I'm a pain. I'm a pain in the butt to my kids, of course, you know, but that's being a good mother. I'm sorry.
And if Irma, to your daughter, if she can hear our conversation, just know that it's not just your mom. All moms are like that. Because my mom will, if I ever had my mom on the show, she'd tell you the exact same stories.
And the mothers that are not, the kids are running around the street committing crimes.
Right, that's true. That's true, and I appreciate it now for sure. So, pivoting back briefly to the Steinberg case, I mean, you're in the box with this guy. You're interrogating this guy.
No, I didn't interrogate
him.
So
did you see him though? Because when did he make the mark about the white shield?
Okay, when we were at his house, he made a lot of rude remarks to me. But when we were in the precinct and he was in the cell, and he saw me walk by, and I said something to him. I forgot what it was. He goes, "Oh, I see you only a white shield. You're not even a detective."
You know? And you shot back, and you said, it's okay. You're a prisoner.
But he was very cocky, you know. He beat up his wife, so he had no respect for women. He was a bully. He killed his daughter. And he served I think 25 years in jail, and I'm pretty sure he's out somewhere.
He's out. Yeah, he got released in like 2006.
Yeah, I remember when he got released. I think I was the only person in the police department that was left from that case. Mm-hmm. I think a few people on that case died, so. Yeah,
and the sad part about it, and then we'll move on from that case in particular, and we're talking with Irma Rivera here in the Mike to Name podcast. It's been a fun conversation so far. I'm having a lot of fun. That case is that she got hit in the head with something, and she just laid on the floor for like 3 hours, and before somebody did something about it, which by then it was much too late. Which is heartbreaking to think a little child like that, 6 years old, I think she was 6 years old, just laying there like that, but there's people that they're beyond redemption.
The whole house was a disgrace. I mean, here's this lawyer living on 10th Street between I believe 5th and 6th Avenue, very affluent block, and the way he lived, he lived like a perp, He was a perp anyway.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, for sure.
He was involved in drugs and stuff, So just because somebody's a lawyer doesn't make them a good person.
Right. No, and that applies to all walks of life.
Right. Same as priests, teachers, everybody. Besides, and another thing, when you were mentioning before that I was a private investigator, I also work and I do CVA cases, Child Victims Act cases. Mm-hmm. Anybody who was a victim of a child abuse, molestation by either a teacher, a priest, anyone that molested them as a child can now sue their abuser. So I'm working on those cases, and those cases are basically for the victims.
And I imagine that has to be pretty rewarding work,
Well, it is. Just some of the stories, some of the people that we're dealing with are in their 50s and 60s now, and they're still you could see how much it affected them to their lives. We got people in their 40s who are still affected from stuff that happened to them when they were younger.
No, it sticks with you. That never goes away. Any traumatic experience, it doesn't even have to be something like that. I still remember burning my hand on the stove when I was 3. And that's a minor thing I can laugh about now. But imagine something like that. That's no laughing matter. It sticks with you. It definitely sticks with you. So you mentioned that specific case had a profound effect on you because to that point, you'd never really seen a child die on the job. Adults, yes, and that's still not easy to deal with. But this is a child. So it ultimately, though, you mentioned it hardened you to where you learned from that case, as you described it in your own words, to switch off your emotions from a case and not let it affect you to that extent on a personal level because you were at the funeral, you cried. I would cry too. She's a baby, pretty much. So nonetheless, as good as that can be for your cases, and generally speaking, sometimes something like that can have an adverse effect on your personal life. I remember watching NYPD 24/7, and Dan Austin, I don't know if you know him, who was a homicide detective for many years. He says that his wife mentioned to him that he has grown more callous because of that. So that said, turning off that figurative switch or turning it on and off as you go, how do you feel that has helped and hurt you as well?
It helped me in the police department. It helped me dealing with cases, and it also helped me in my personal life, in my family life. If anything happens, I'm always really good at that, showing my emotional panicking. I kind of can keep a clear head and deal with whatever the issue is. But the only way that it kind of hurts me in my personal life, I feel like my family can think that that I'm cold, or I feel like I'm desensitized. You know, like when things happen, I don't react the way most people do. Like if you hear loud noise, sometimes I don't even react at all. You know, sometimes like right now in our family, you know, my husband needs a heart transplant. Like, you know, he had a heart failure. But for me, it's like, you know, I might not show the emotion that they expect me to show. So in their eyes, they probably think I'm cold, you know?
No, yeah.
No, I am a little bit, but you know, that's besides the
But
point.
it doesn't mean you don't love him. I'm sure that, you know, you feel for him and, you know, you want him to be okay. I hope he pulls through.
I love, but I do feel, but I do feel, you know, you know, but I mean, times change you know, people change and people grow and people change and feelings change. But, you know, I mean, it's still your family. You still try to keep your family, you know, keep everybody happy, or you kind of there for them, you know, they need you, but you know, but it's different. And I think the police department kind of like hurts you a little bit because it kind of makes you, I don't know, just a little bit colder in your heart, you know?
Fire department too. Not that I'm putting the fire department down, but think about the stuff the FDNY has to see on a daily basis.
I've seen burned bodies. I've seen homicides where the people were burned, and it's like the worst thing that you can actually ever see. And also, I've been into burning buildings as a cop. I don't know how the firemen do it because that smoke is so strong, and also the smell, and then the fire seems like it's alive. It's making this noise, you know, it's kind of like scary, you know.
Yeah, I'm about to have a guy on. Sorry, go ahead.
I know the firemen and the cops always like to fight, but you know, we kind of do. My son.
Yeah. I wanted to be one too, but then health got in the way. But that was originally my career goal. And it's funny you mentioned I'm about to have a guy on. You know, I'm working out a date with him, but his name's Paul Hassan, and he was in Rescue 1 with the FDNY for 20 years. And you know, they talked. You know, he talked about that in a documentary one time. Is the fire getting hotter? What are you looking for in a fire? So I mean, it's both jobs are tricky stuff. But it's funny you mentioned the firemen and the cops. Vic Hollyfield was on Off the Cuff one time. He said you don't really see it when you're on patrol. You see it once you get to ESU. That's where there's the beef between ESU and some of the members of the fire department. So you mentioned previously being in the RIP unit. Bill Cannon talked about it with you when you were on Off the Cuff. He talked about what he was looking for in robbery, certain patterns he would spot. That's key to being able to identify and arrest these people. What would you look for?
First of all, the RIP unit, you know, we deal with the robbery victims after the fact. It was after the fact. So what they do after the fact. So they look at pictures, you know. So like what I would look for, say we had a pattern, you would look at clothing, you know, like a lot of times after the fact, you have a description of clothing the person was wearing. So when you go out on patrol or when you go out in the street looking for a possible perp, you know, you look for clothing, you look for different things that the person had. Like for instance, I had a case one time, there was a case one time where it was a Black guy who spoke Spanish. And I remember that clearly. He was a Black guy who spoke Spanish. And later on, like a week or two later, I remember there was two guys in the cell. One was a Black guy, one was a Spanish guy. And the Black guy started speaking Spanish to the other Spanish guy. But he was definitely African-American, but he spoke Spanish really well. And so I remember calling like the robbery unit and telling them, you know, this guy matches the description of a guy who's robbing like senior citizens, and it turned out to be him. You know, so certain things you gotta be really aware of small details. And I think I'm really good at small details. You know, I notice everything. You kind of like pick up on everything. You pick up on things that other people don't pick up on. It's great for police work, but it's really bad in your personal life. You know, it really is, because you kind of can tell who's bullshit, who's lying to you. You know, you can tell who's lying to you, who's not being real, who's being fake. You know, so it does affect your personal life a little bit, and it makes you kind of a little bit more kind of leery of people. You know.
Thank you for catching yourself. I appreciate it. I don't have to edit anything. But it's funny, when you mentioned that, I laughed because we were talking about moms having that sense earlier, because my mom's, she's not in law enforcement, but she's worked in plenty of lawyers' offices as a paralegal. It's the same thing. You can't get nothing by moms in general, but especially with the moms, like with my mom's background, your background, man, I don't even try anymore. You know, guilty.
And it's funny because you run across other people in life, you know, other mothers, you know, and they think that kids are such angels, but you know their kids are not an angel. But I never tell another parent like what their kids are doing wrong. I don't mind people telling me what my kids are doing wrong, but I would never tell another parent if I know anything about their child what they're doing wrong, because people take that really offensively. They get really angry.
Yeah, not my mom. Like I wouldn't even try. I wouldn't even try it, because there's so many people that know my mom and love my mom that if they saw me acting crazy out in the street, because my mom will even know what email I sent. Because she, being a paralegal, that you have the LexisNexis, which I'm sure you use too. And did you send this email last night? I'm like,
it's funny talking about moms. A lot of times, even to this day, if I see little kids on the street doing bad things, and they're like young kids and they're doing stuff, I go, "Oh my God, I know your mother," and you got to see the reaction in their faces all the time.
Like their whole life flashes in front of their eyes.
I always go, "I know who you are. I know who your mother is. I'm going to tell your mother." And they, my mother? Like they get scared. The good kids get scared,
Yeah, the bad ones don't. It's like, oh, so,
Right.
Yeah, it's true. It's an indicator.
Or the ones who don't have a strict parent,
Yeah.
Being a parent is really important, I think, when it comes to your children, how they act outside also.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Because if you're the kind of mother that if the teacher yells at your child and you come into the school yelling at the teacher, there's a problem.
Yeah, there is. That's and I saw that. My middle school was like that, because we had a lot of kids from some of these neighborhoods that weren't so good, man. And you felt for them. At the time, it was difficult because we were always at each other's throats. But, now that I look back on it, you feel for them, because, they didn't have that stable environment. And you don't know what somebody's bringing to them, bringing with them, I should say, when they get through the door. I mean, you saw that on the job, too. Cops go through a lot at home. I mean, you don't know what's going on in that person's head, especially if you don't have the maturity to deal with that stuff,
And that's the problem right now. All these kids who are out of school, all the schools being closed right now, imagine how the child that's home with the abuser, either the stepfather that's molesting them, the father that's molesting them, whoever's molesting them, whoever's beating them. These kids have nowhere to go. They're home. They've been home for 1 year where the public schools closed. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times is when you detect that there's a problem in the home is when the kids go to school, when the child tells a friend in school, "Oh, this is happening to me," and they tell somebody else. But right now, think about it. How many kids for this 1 year are home being abused? I mean, you're hearing about the suicide with these young kids. Why are they committing suicide? What's going on at home that these kids are committing suicide? So it's a real big problem with COVID,
Yeah, exacerbated by the fact that they can't go anywhere because of this, and understandably so. We don't want to get sick. Obviously, we want to take the necessary precautions, but yeah, it's a devastating thing. And just besides the sickness itself, it's because of the additional layers to it. Being
a kid, like when I was a kid, going to school was like my way of escaping out of my house. Like I used to hate being at home. I mean, I hated it, not because my parents were abusive, but it was just like we couldn't do anything. My parents.
Not me. I'm a homebody. I love being home. I love it. I do not complain about it.
I'm out all day. My kids are homebodies because I took them out so much when they were young.
Yeah.
Home, but me, I'm always outside. I love being outdoors.
Yeah.
I go walks. I'm always out. I'm very rarely home.
You mentioned that the other day because, to give you a little inside baseball, folks, Irma and I, scheduling this episode, we were talking on the phone a couple times before this actual episode is taking place. And it's amazing, like in that 20-minute conversation, the amount of things that you do. I mean, you don't take a break. You don't take a break. You're still active. You're still out there, which is good because you need to do that, especially now. But
my mother lived till she was 93 years old, and she was active the whole time. Even though she didn't know how to read and write, even though she was very old-fashioned, but she was always active. She was out. She was going to the store. She was going to the store in 93. She was going to the store by herself with her little coche, her little shopping cart, But yeah. I want to be like her, but I just want to be able, right now I'm just dying to just like leave and go on vacation and jump on planes and do whatever the hell I want to do. And that's kind of like where I am right now.
I mean, there were some places, because I'm a more introverted person, there was a meme on Instagram that was like, I'm an introvert, but geez, I like going to some places, that's me right now, man. I want to hit up a Yankee game and things like that, and we'll wait it out and we'll see. And I managed to survive 11 months at this point, but I can only read so many books and clean my room so many times before I start to go stir crazy. So
come clean my kids' rooms. I wish they would clean their rooms.
It'll be $20. No, I'm kidding. So you've talked about making your way over to the Special Victims Division, where you'd ultimately spend a decade, 87 to 97, right? In Special Victims. So that being said, that's definitely, as we kind of talked about, in having to work the Steinberg case and other cases too, it's not a unit for the faint of heart. So when you joined that unit, were you assigned there by somebody, or did you join on your own volition? Because the reason I asked that is when you talk about, Bill Cannon talked about, and so did Mark, with the NYPD, as opposed to back then when there were 3 different departments with transit and housing, NYPD was the one where you could really advance your career and go anywhere. So you had narcotic experience. You would do homicide later, you know, but there's emergency service, there's bomb squad, there's street crime. Why that unit if you chose to went there?
I was in the robbery unit. I was in the RIP unit, and we had a big pattern rape case going on.
Mm-hmm.
And the sex crimes unit was working in my office, and one of the lieutenants there offered that unit to me. The reason I always wanted to go to that unit was because early in my career, I saw a few patterns going on when I was in 2-3, you know, when I was on patrol. And I remember seeing some of the detectives in sex crimes. One of them was Tommy Belfiore, that I always admired him as a cop. And also there was a female detective. Her name was, I believe it was Maureen Kemp. She was like an old time detective. And I believe she was in sex crimes or maybe homicide. But I remember the first time I laid eyes on her, I was like, wow, where does she work? And I believe I heard she was in sex crimes. And I was like amazed that, you know, here's this female detective, you know, and I wanted to be like her. You know, I did want to be her. And I said, wow, I'd like to go to the sex crimes unit one day. So when it was offered to me, I jumped on it right away. And I also felt that sex crimes was a good place to go. You know, I didn't want to be a boss. I didn't want to be a sergeant. I wanted to be a detective.
On the street.
I wanted to be on the street. Yeah, I didn't want to boss anybody around. You know, I wanted to just be a detective. I didn't want to be responsible for anybody. So the sex crimes unit, when it was offered to me, was like, it was really a good place to go. And also another detective in my unit, Detective Eddie Quinones is the one who told me, you know, take that unit, that's a good place to go. So when it was offered to me, you know, then I went and I took it.
I got to ask you, and we're talking with Irma Rivera here at the Mike the New Haven podcast. Nice enough for her to join me. This podcast is proof that a Dominican and Puerto Rican can conversate civilly. You know, this is a nice civil dynamic going on right now. And Bill, and Mark, if you watch this episode, I'm poaching all your guests. Sorry. So that being said, I have to ask you this because I'm a Law and Order super fan. I love all three versions of it, and you probably know where I'm going with the Special Victims Unit. When you see a character like Olivia Benson, is that a realistic portrayal of a female detective in Special Victims?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, she actually went to the Special Victims Unit, and Tanya Pauly, who worked in the Manhattan Special Victims Unit, actually met up with her, and they talked, you know. So I don't watch the show as much as I used to, but I think she's pretty good. You know, I'm not sure if it's exactly like female cops are like, you know, I mean, it's TV, but you know, she's a pretty good character.
They did a pilot on you, didn't they? That's where the Miss Homicide name comes from, right? That's what they were teasing you with.
It was just one time. They did one show. My friend Rick Torelli and Kevin Kaufman, who had a production company, did one episode of a show with me and my niece Lilia. You know, it was called Miss Homicide. It only aired a couple of times, and it aired in other countries. Oh,
okay. All right. So that's interesting. At least, hey, it's a cool story. It's even if it's only a couple times, you know, it's definitely, I was on TV, you know.
But it's out there. I mean, it's out there. And I've done a lot of Perfect Murders, different documentaries I've done.
Yeah, we talked to.
I get a lot of calls for them, but a lot of times I just turn them down. I just don't want to really be on TV.
Oh, because you were on A&E. I remember that you were talking about the Steinberg case. You know, I think that the case I Can't Forget was the name of it. You know, so you've been on a few things. Yeah, but yeah, you're in demand. You're in demand.
The reason I like doing them also is, number one, because again, you know, the fact that I'm Hispanic, I'm a female. I like to show other young girls, you know, because especially now in this day and age, is like everything is so racial. It was never like that for me. Like growing up, I didn't really care about race.
Mm-hmm.
But everything's so racial these days, you know. And I wanted to see that, you know, you could be Hispanic, you could be anything, and you can do whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter, like, you know. It's not like it doesn't matter like if you're what nationality you are, you can become whoever you want to become, you know. All this other race talk, I'm so against it, really. I think
bombarded with it too.
It's dividing the country. I mean, think about it. I mean, your friends, aren't your friends? You don't have a diversity of friends?
Yes.
So yes. Why? You know, what the hell? Like, what's going on now? You know, I mean, it's just ridiculous. They're making it worse. I thought things were getting better racially, and I just think that recently, all these left-wing people are just making it worse.
It's, you know, my criteria, my mom has always raised me, and, you know, have friends of different ages too. It doesn't matter, especially as you get older. You don't have to have friends within your age range. Have older friends. I got friends in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and the criteria should always be, are you a jerk? The answer to that question is no. You're cool with me, you know? That's it. That's all it should be, because, you know, and I was watching Super Bowl, as I mentioned, when I was mentioning the previous episodes I did, which, by the way, I picked the Chiefs to win. I was wrong about that. But, you know, every other commercial kind of touched upon that. And, you know, I don't have an opinion. I'm neutral, but.
Commercial. I mean, first of all, I didn't watch the Super Bowl because I had to stick because they don't like the cops, you know, and you know, NFL, you know, they cause a lot of friction. So I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but I did watch all the commercials later on. And that's one thing I noticed, like, every commercial, everything is like, I don't know, I just think everything is to the extreme these days. That's just.
Yeah, that's a lot of things, unfortunately. So, I mean, we kind of talked about it.
Black and white, like where does everybody else fit in? It's just like,
you know, it's intense. It's definitely an intense climate. Like I remember when I had Mark on and we were talking about how social media is really bad for that. Like I have Twitter to promote this show because Twitter is the best way to do it. LinkedIn too. But I literally mind my business on Twitter, but I scroll my timeline and it's like it's nuclear war wrapped in a shootout, wrapped in more nuclear war. It's basically what I'm getting at. It's a very toxic climate, you know, and you're just looking at it like.
Yeah, social media really is. Social media is what caused a lot of problems too. I mean, with social media, you have even the internet. You have so much stuff. You have all the pervs who are doing child pornography. Yep. You have all the people hiding, sending out their racist remarks, but they're not exposing who they really are. It's just like ridiculous. I mean, I don't really do. I have Facebook, but my Facebook account is basically just cops in my family. You know, I don't really do a lot of social media. I don't give my opinions. I don't post anything political. You know, I just don't do any of that stuff.
No, I don't do any of that stuff either. It's just better because majority of the stuff I don't care about. Not to say that I'm callous, but I don't have an opinion. I'm not interested. I have my Twitter, you know, for sports because I'm a Yankees, Knicks, Giants, Rangers. I want to keep up with what's going on with my teams and, you know, keep up what's going on with the news and obviously, like I said, promote the show. So let me just say for the record, if you ever think about joining Twitter, remember this conversation. No, don't do it. It's the worst one. You have LinkedIn, that's fine. Do not join Twitter. It's terrible. Yeah, it is bad. Moving on, we kind of talked about how kids are being affected by this pandemic and with the suicide rates and things like that. So in general, first responders, as we also kind of alluded to earlier, are really affected too, even before this pandemic, just the stuff that you have to see. We talked about the fire department, nurses, paramedics, police, obviously. You guys see the worst of the worst, and it sticks with you. Duty Ron talks about it too. I mean, there are certain things he can't get out of his head. You were in the morgue after 9/11. You can't get that out of your head. And I don't know how anybody would be. And unfortunately, that's why you look at the divorce rate, you look at the alcoholism rate, and unfortunately, the suicide rate too amongst first responders is particularly high. And we talked about that switch, turning it on, turning it off. You didn't have your kids until a little later. You had your first kid at 36, which is 1998. And so that being said, even before kids and obviously after kids, how did you go about trying to make sure you had that healthy balance to where, yeah, you're an effective cop, but when you come home, okay, I'm with my husband. Once you had your kids, I'm with my kids and I can be a mom, I can be a wife, and I can decompress.
Mm-hmm. It took a long time for me to learn how to decompress. I think I really learned how to decompress maybe in the last 10 years. You know, I think the years before that were really rough for me, even when my kids were young, you know. It was just really hard juggling the kids, working, you know, if I had a homicide, you know, having to pick up my kids, dropping them off for my mother. It was like really a lot of stress for me in those years, you know. I don't know how I actually survived all those years. I think the way I survived basically was exercise. I mean, to this day, I exercise. I try to keep myself healthy. You know, now, I mean, I stopped riding a bike as much because I got hit by a truck in 2018. I almost got killed. So I haven't really gotten on a bike since then. I'm not riding in the city like I used to, but exercise is what I do. And I walk a lot. Like I'll walk 11 miles, you know, like.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I walk. And especially lately, since COVID started, I've been walking, jumping rope, you know, instead of like gaining weight during COVID, I actually lost weight.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Shout out to you.
Yeah, I kept myself busy. Even when I had COVID, I didn't know I had COVID. I remember jumping rope going, oh my God, my chest feels so tight. But I had COVID. I didn't realize that I had it. You know, I didn't have it as bad as some people had it, thank God. And one other thing thank God was I didn't affect anyone in my family.
Yeah.
It didn't affect anyone in my family. It shows that I'm not too close to anybody. I kind of like keep my distance from everybody. But I really sometimes wonder how I actually dealt with it between the police department, working all those hours, having my kids, helping take care of my mother, you know, who used to drive me crazy. And I think about how many times I used to yell and scream at her because it was just like, it's so much, you know. And also even to this day, when things happen in my family, everybody always comes to me like, you know, oh my God, you know what happened? You're the fixer, you know, I mean, and now I'm at the point, like now, even my husband being sick and everything, I don't want to know anything about anybody. Right? First time in my life, actually, that I'm being a little bit selfish, and it's about me now. Really, I'm taking care of myself, and that's it. My daughter's 18. I always said when she went to college, that would be it. So I'm basically just now looking out for myself. I need it. I mean, if I have 20 years left in my life, if I can live 20 more years and be like 80 years old, I want to enjoy my life. You know, I feel like I've been living my life all these years for everybody else. Between all the victims and all the people in the police department and all the victims that I had, you know, and family, I never really lived my life for me. And I feel like now I am.
That was my mom in that sense, because my mom will be 48 in August. And mom, if you hear this and I revealed your age, please don't kill me. But she had my older sister when she was 21. She had me when she was 27. And I mentioned this to you when we talked. I was a very sick kid. The first 3 years of my life, I was in and out of the hospital. I had really bad asthma. It's under control now. I haven't had an issue with asthma like years. But she still doesn't sleep well to this day because she always used to look in my kuna, my crib, and see if I was okay. And so constantly having to take me to the hospital and all the appointments, constantly having to look after me and my sister as we got through school. You know, when she says now, I need a day for me, I understand. And part of the reason now is, there's something, I mean, daughters, I'm sure, want to do this too, and I'm sure your daughter wants to do it, but there's something about sons. We may drive you guys crazy, meaning moms, but we love our moms, man. Like any good son, we love our moms because there's that bond. I can't put it into words, but it's a special bond. And so we want to pay it back. And I think that's the part for me now that as I get older, now that I have my driver's license, it's a little tough with the pandemic trying to get a job, but it's all about paying it back so that she can kick her feet up metaphorically and literally speaking and relax, because you guys deserve it.
In me, I don't need anything from them. I just need them to not need me. That's it. They don't have to need me, and I'll be very happy with that. If they don't need me for anything, I'm fine with that. I'll help them out, whatever. But I want to be able to jump on a plane and leave and do whatever the heck I want to do, and that's my goal right now. And after seeing what happened with this COVID and how easy it is for people to drop dead, I want to enjoy my life.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. I think it's a lot of us right now. So as I mentioned,
you know what it is? Wait, but people can consider that as being selfish, but it's not. You know, it's certainly in your life, especially as cops, all that we've done throughout
self-care.
Yeah, you have to take care of yourself.
You have to do it. You have to do it. It's understandable. I mean, like you talked about it. You saw, even if you weren't in special victims, you saw a lot. You saw a lot.
Yes, I've seen the worst of the worst. You know, and you know something, like I'm very grateful for my life. I'm very grateful for everything that God's given me. You know, I really am. I'm very grateful for everything. But now I think it's time for me to enjoy my life a little.
Yeah, and you take it with you. I mean, there's one detective I'm working on. I mentioned him to you off the air. I don't want to mention it on here because I don't want to spoil it. But he was in the bomb squad for many years, and this man almost got killed on 9/11. Like he was standing. You know, the old customs house that used to be in front of the Trade Center. He was standing in there, and the North Tower collapsed on top of him, and he lived. His partner was standing 10 feet behind him. His partner got killed. And so something like that, I mean, even if it wasn't extreme stuff like that having to go through in 15, 20, 25 years, however long you spend on the job, at the end of that, when you put in your paperwork and you collect your pension, you just want to be able to take a deep breath and, as you said, enjoy your life because you've earned it, you know?
I went to work right away. I went to work at NYU for a while after I retired, you know? Mm-hmm. So I just always been working. I'm always working, you know. I think it's time soon, maybe in another couple of years, I'll just stop working.
Yeah, and good for you. Good for you because you've been at it a long time. 1982. That's next year to be 40 years that you've been working in one capacity or another. You know, so that's a long time.
I was 14 years old. I've had a job since I was 14.
So
I've never been without a job since I was 14 years
old. So 45 years. And I'm not trying to make you feel old. I don't want you to reach through the Zoom screen and strangle me. But
I don't care. Age is just a number.
Yeah, and look, there are people. I said this to my sister when I was telling her I was going to have you on. That there are people in their like 20s and 30s that I've seen that do not look as good as you do at your age. you know, and that's tip of the cap to you, because it's all about self-care, you know, and you take care of yourself. So pivoting.
Genes from my mother.
That too. Yes, the good genes counts. So you were in the homicide unit, but before I get to the homicide unit, actually, because I want to touch on this, while you were in Special Victims from 1987 to 1997, I think during that time period, you also joined the hostage negotiation team.
Yes.
So being in that team, talk about seeing the worst of the worst. These are situations that are volatile. Take me through joining that unit and some of the more harrowing experiences you had.
That was a really good unit to be in. And when you're in the hostage team, like you're part of the team, but they only call you when they need you.